Welcome back, Rabotai, to our study of Mishnayot Masechet Berachot. We are up to Perek Daled, Mishnah Daled, talking about now a person's kavanah and attitude towards tefillah. The Mishnah reads, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer said, Ha'oseh tefilato keva, a person who makes his tefillah, keva, we have to explain that word in a moment, and tefilato tahanunim. His prayer is not considered supplications before God. What does it mean that a person's tefillah is keva? So it could mean that it comes from the word kavua, a person who makes his tefillah permanent and set, but in a negative way. As Bartirura explains, tefilato dome alav kemasoi, the permanence with which he prays makes tefillah like a burden on his shoulders. So just like a person who's carrying a heavy burden is looking to unpack that burden as quickly and as painlessly as possible, that's how a person would be viewing tefillah. I just want to get this obligation over with as quickly and as painlessly as I can so that I can move on to more important things. If a person has such an attitude, en tefilatot tahanunim, his tefillah is not considered supplications before the Almighty. I saw a nice note here by Tosfot and Sheshem, who write, every moment of the day, we need God's mercy, and we must pray for it with the humble heart and broken spirit of a poor man asking for the things that he desperately needs. A person who regards prayer as a burden displays the arrogance of someone who thinks that he will receive God's help even if he does not plead for it. So in other words, a person who thinks I don't need tefillah in order to get anything from the Almighty because I could do it myself, that's somebody who views tefillah as a burden, and hence his tefillah will not be supplications because he's not really going to genuinely ask from God because he thinks it comes from himself.
You need to have keva because you need to have a set.
Well, keva could be a positive thing in other ways. If a person is praying in a set time, in a set minyan, in a set place, there are certain kavua elements that are necessary for tefillah in order to maximize concentration and intention. However, if it's keva in the sense that a person just wants to go through the motions, that's where the Rabbi Eliezer is criticizing the individual and saying his prayer will not be meaningful. Rabbi Yoshua Omer. The Gemara now turns to another discussion. We saw in the previous Mishnah about how there are situations when a person can condense the Amidah. The next section talks about what if a person is in a makom sakana, is in a dangerous place where tefillah, even on a shortened level like Havinenu, is not an option for him. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, and it's the same Rabbi Yoshua who condensed the tefillah in the last Mishnah, he says in this Mishnah, Hamhalech bimkom sakana, somebody who's walking in a dangerous area, animals, bandits, he cannot stop for a moment to be able to pray lest something attack him. Mitpalel tefillah kitzara. Instead, he would just say a shortened version of prayer, not even a version of prayer, just a shortened prayer, which is basically one beracha, and he does so while he's walking on his path, so he stays alert to his surroundings. Omer, and he says, Hosha Hashem et amecha et she'erit Israel. God, bring salvation to your nation, the remnants of the Jewish people. Bechol parashat ha'ibur yihu tzorchehem lefanecha. In all, parashat ha'ibur means like the forks in the road, in the areas where people cross from one place to another. Let all of their needs be put before you. In other words, provide for all of the travelers all of the things that they need to arrive at their destination safely. Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you God, shomea tefillah. Earlier in the prayer, when we said Hashem, obviously the person would put in the real name of God, Yud Ke Vav Ke. So this is basically just one beracha. It doesn't even really constitute a prayer in the traditional sense of the Amidah. So, for example, if we take a look at Bartinura's explanation of this prayer, he writes, Afilu b'sha'a shehem porshim la'avera. So he explains b'chol parashat ha'ibur, not like I said, where it talks about forks in the road where a person is going in different directions. He says parashat ha'ibur means even from the word porshim, even when the Jews separate from your deeds and are transgressing the laws of the Torah, yutzorchehem giluyim lefarecha, allow their needs to come before you and lerachem alehem, and have mercy upon them. Ultimately, Bartinura rules, ve'en halacha ke Rabbi Yoshua. The halacha here does not follow Rabbi Yoshua's opinion. Rather, the Gemara offers several other versions of this tefillah kitzara that happens bimkom sakana. And he says that the halacha is that the prayer is tzorche amecha Yisrael merubim. So you can look in the Gemara to see the language of that prayer. The concept of praying one short beracha is accepted, is adopted. It's just not this text that Rabbi Yoshua presents before us. Now, what's the difference between this tefillah kitzara, which Rabbi Yoshua gives to us bimkom sakana, and the condensed amidah, which we read about in the previous Mishnah? Well, there's many differences. Says Bartenura, mitpalel ota adam kishehu mehalech. A person can pray this prayer, the shortened makom sakana prayer, while he's still walking. The havinenu prayer we talked about in the previous Mishnah, that has to be said standing, just like the regular amidah would have to be said. Another difference, eno mitpalel lo shalosh rishonot velo shalosh aharonot. He doesn't pray the first three and last three berachot of the amidah. So here, he just says this one beracha. In Havinenu that we read about in the previous Mishnah, the person is still obligated to pray the first three berachot, right? Magen Avraham, Ata Gibor, and Ata Kadosh, and the last three berachot, as he would in a regular Amidah. It's only the middle berachot that get condensed. So that's a second difference. And a third difference, says Bartenura, Kishiyavor makom hasakana, when he passes the danger, v'tityashev da'ato, and he's able to reconcentrate, tzarich lahzor lehitpalel. This prayer, the shortened makom sakana prayer, does not constitute tefillah. He does not discharge his obligation of prayer, and he has to go back and pray ketikna, as is normally instituted, imlo avra onata, if the time did not pass. So essentially, to summarize it, we have two types of shortened prayer. We have havinenu, which is the previous Mishnah, and we have this one, this tefillah ketzara bimkom sakana. Havinenu is a real amidah, hence before and after three berachot, hence you have to pray standing up, hence it discharges your obligation even should you reach a place where you could have full concentration. This shortened prayer, tefillah ketzara, doesn't constitute a real amidah. It's just a stand-in blessing that a person says to God when they're in a difficult situation. When they reach their destination, they'll have to pray again, should the time still be available for them. This doesn't have amidah properties like three berachot before and after, and it could be said while walking. It does not need to be said while standing straight up.
So when Mishnah in our that said tefillah, you can play in any language. I could take that and say that time that the guy needed to pray second half. Forget about what Havinenu or Shia Etamet the pasuk you just said. Let's say the guy just prays any language, in English, whatever he might pray. We'll have that structure of the Hebrew in an English format and just talk about it and just talk to it. Because this Mishnah had mentioned that you could pray in any language. So,
so the Mishnah talks about praying in any language. And so what's the question?
So no structure, meaning the guy could just stay, as he's walking, he's praying.
That's not an amidah. That's not, it doesn't matter. Language doesn't play a role in this. If you wanted to pray in another language, so you'd have to do a direct translation of the tefillah. If you did a direct translation of a regular amidah or a havinenu, that's an amidah. If you're doing a translation of this tefillah, it's not. Translation, what language you pray in doesn't matter. Doesn't matter over here. That's not what we're saying. And when we say that a person could pray in any language, it means that a person has to still pray the actual structured amidah, as the rabbis put it. He's just going to pray it in English. Yeah. Mishnah Hey talks about directional praying. A person praying in the proper direction, proper kivun towards Eretz Yisrael, towards the Bet HaMikdash, the Kodesh HaKodashim. Hayad rochev ala hamor, a person who is riding on a donkey and the time for prayer comes, yered, ideally, he should get down from the donkey in order to pray with full concentration. If he does not have the ability to come down off the donkey, circumstances dictate he does not have the ability to do so, he doesn't have anybody to watch over his animal, hold on to his animal, yahazir et panav, he should reorient his kivun, his directional prayer, towards the proper prayer. But if he doesn't have the ability to do that, for example, he's riding in the opposite direction from the direction of prayer towards Eretz Yisrael and the Bet HaMikdash, then he should simply have kavanah in his heart that he is directionally praying towards the Kodesh HaKodashim. Bartenura points out over here that the halacha does not follow this Mishnah. He says, "En halacha ki stam mishnah zo." The halacha does not follow the stam mishnah here, in the sense that a person would come down from his donkey if he had someone else to watch it. Our mishnah says if he can come down from the donkey, he should come down and give the donkey to someone else to watch. Says Barterura, not the halacha. Ben yeshlo mishi yochaz hamoro, whether he has someone else with him to hold on to his donkey. Ben enlo mishi yehoz hamoro, whether he doesn't have somebody to have his donkey. Lo yered, he doesn't have to come down. In other words, even handing the donkey to someone else, he will be worried about, is the guy watching it, is the guy holding it properly or whatnot. So it's still not going to be something that puts his mind at ease, which means he'll have more kavanah staying on the donkey than handing it to anybody else. He says, his mind is not at ease even when coming down from the donkey. And so therefore, we hold more leniently here that the person should just stay on the donkey and continue to pray. What we take away from this Mishnah is that a person always has to pray in the same direction towards Eretz Yisrael as much as possible. If that's not possible, then the fallback is, excuse me, Yechaven et libo to Kodesh HaKodashim. He should put his heart and his mental imagery towards the fact that he's standing in the Beit HaMikdash, towards the Kodesh HaKodashim, and his prayers are being funneled together with the prayers of all of Am Yisrael upwards towards the heaven through that place.
On a plane, you shouldn't discount direction, like the plane's going wherever it's going.
We're going to see more about planes and cars and other transportation vehicles is coming in the next Mishnah. That's coming in Mishnah Vav, where standing up is not a safe option for the person, and it's not going to make a person have concentration because turbulence, because he can't be bumped down. So
let's say you have that spot where you're good. You should try to go with the right direction, right?
Theoretically, yes. How does a person know how to orient themselves on an airplane? I don't know how they're going to necessarily do that. Plus, an airplane could always get bumpy at any time. So the person's always worried about the fact that maybe a bump might come and I'm going to fall down, which means he's not going to have concentration. This is why, as we'll see in the next Mishnah, sitting down on a plane, on trains, on fast-moving vehicles, typically the way that we're going to rule as per the next Mishnah. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen.
I was still sitting